Nancy.
I'm used to it. I'm part of the Rutland Area Disaster Animal Response Team.
All right, thank you for being here tonight, Nancy.
Thanks,
I've
Nancy.
officially started the recording because I forgot to record it for the roll call, but I don't think anyone cares about that anyway. But okay, go ahead, Mike. Now you can take it to the floor.
All right, second time, I'll seek a motion to approve the meeting agenda.
So moved.
There's second.
Second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Motion passes. The agenda is approved. I'm seeking a motion to approve the June 28th, 2023 meeting minutes.
Accept. Second.
There's second.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the meeting minutes are approved. And for section 4, I'll hand it over to Maggie to give us some announcements specifically surrounding binary blizzard buildup update.
Yes, thank you, Mike. So binary blizzard. I actually have a big announcement towards the end, but so I wanted to start off with our activities for this fall. We have a long-term power outage facilitated discussion / mini tabletop that is being facilitated by VEM. It is scheduled for October 18th, which is a Thursday from 3 to 5. And you can RSVP at the link there. I will be sending out these slides afterwards, so you should have access to the link then. By that 16th. This is an incident that will emphasize town-wide impacts. So obviously not just one community is going to be affected. It'll likely be an all hands on deck type thing. So we really want to encourage representatives from fire, rescue, police, and other municipal staff like town clerks, if they're involved in an emergency type position at the EOC, road commissioners and so forth to participate. I could always send out an email blast, but really it'll be up to you guys having those connections on the ground and getting in that persuasive angle. I know capacity has been a challenge recently, but the more hands that we have on, the more effective it's going to be, and the more comprehensive we can be with our approach going forward. So I've already advertised this, I believe, but if you haven't received it, or if you want me to send you the link, just let me know.
Please do.
Okay.
Maggie, could you clarify Wednesday? The 18th is Wednesday. Is this Wednesday or Thursday?
Oh, is it?
I think.
Let me just make sure. You're right, it is Wednesday. Okay, so that's a typo on the invitation. I'll definitely fix that.
So it is Wednesday.
Yes, it is Wednesday.
Great.
And then in November, I have a new. Okay, let me back up. So I sent out a proposal a couple of weeks ago about adding a BT alert system to our vulnerable populations protocol. There's been conversation for a while now about streamlining it, because there were concerns that if there was a region-wide event, let's say like extreme heat, then the social service agencies wouldn't want, 27 different towns giving them phone calls about the protocol. That being said, we didn't want to just leave the initiating phone call to one person, because that creates a point of failure. Essentially, that person is not there. So our kind of compromise was to have a couple of EMDs in this kind of core group throughout the Rutland region who will have the BT alert administrative privileges. So when they want to activate the protocol, they will send out the BT alert. It'll go out to all of the EMDs, all of the points of contact for the service agencies, as well as someone at VDH, in this case, Eric Pulver, myself, and Tyga, our regional coordinator. So that way, when one person activates it, we're all aware, we're all on the same page, and that'll hopefully reduce the number of redundant phone calls. Because people will now know, okay, it's been activated, but I'm not going to make a call unless I know I have a specific patient, a specific resident that I'm concerned about. So that was the intent of that. And thanks to the people who joined our core group, including Bill and Jan, we're now able to get the system off the ground. So next month is essentially going to be next month is the training, and then November is going to be the test of this system. Jen, go ahead. Sorry, I saw your hand, but I wanted to finish.
Sure, I was in no hurry. I just wanted to back up to the long-term power outage in October. I have invited a large number of people who would be involved in our situation if this really did happen. And what's coming up is people are more willing to do a tabletop at our town office and attend remotely. Is that an option for towns to do?
I don't believe that conversation came up with Tyga. I can always circle back with her and ask. It was my understanding that this is based off of the mini tabletop that was done, I think, back in Bennington a couple of months ago. And I don't believe they had a virtual option, but I can always ask her and see if we can accommodate for that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And then our last related activity for this calendar year is going to be keeping it light because it's the holiday season. So for our REMC first quarter meeting, the first quarter meeting of the next fiscal year, which is about to start, we will be having a guest speaker from VDH, more info to come. And with that, I want to go over scheduling for 2024 really quick. So I have a core group, a couple of EMDs, and a couple of community partners to kind of bounce ideas off of each other about what events we want to try to have within the next year, what kind of plans we want to get made, or workshops we want to have done, exercises, and so forth. So that is currently in progress. Once I have a final calendar that we all agree on, have the details hammered out for, I will be sharing it with everyone in the committee so that you can be aware of what our plans are. That being said, the plans are not necessarily set in stone. I think the July floods taught us that. Obviously, I will make every effort to deliver all of these events and activities to the end, but there is no guarantee. There will be a degree of flexibility depending on what occurs. And speaking of flexibility, I just got a message from VEM yesterday about a major change to the binary blizzard plans. So if you recall, the functional exercise was supposed to be in October 2024. The message that I received yesterday said that it is being brought back down to a tabletop exercise. That's one day in October. And the following year, in October 2025, is when the functional exercise is going to occur. And the reasoning behind this is essentially that they had the SEOC open for a very long time. And there's a lot of after action reviews that they want to do, a lot of, tweaking of systems and putting them through the motions to see if there's any improvements. And they just want to give themselves some time for that. So that means we have even more time to prepare. Yay! I'm going to talk your head about it for another year. So this will definitely, the binary blizzard updates will definitely be a permanent addition to the agenda, at least for the next couple of years. Yay. Okay, next we have our guest speaker. I've invited Scott Whittier from the National Weather Service. He has kindly agreed to discuss what has happened this past summer, what weather conditions led up to what we saw, and how we can prepare for events like this in the future. So with that, I will hand it over to Scott. Thank you for being here tonight, Scott.
Thanks, Maggie, and good evening, everyone. Sorry I can't be there. I'll give you a little bit of a background. As government employees and traveling in government vehicles, we are given a gas card to go and fill up the tank. In somebody's wisdom, it certainly wasn't mine, they decided that they were going to change the processing company for the gas card at the same time that we are starting our new fiscal year. And that's all coming up, as you know, with hearing of the news by the end of this week. And they would not allow for the overlapping of purchasing the gas on one credit card and purchasing it on another one come October 1. So they have basically have asked us for no travel a week before the end of the closing, so that so the bookkeeping can be nice and friendly. Of course, they discussed this 6 months ago. They did not let the field offices know until about 10 to 14 days ago. So not only the meeting with you folks, but I was supposed to have something tomorrow, and I was supposed to have something next Monday, but next Monday may actually be a government shutdown anyway. So, the government shutdown in October is similar to fall foliage. It happens every single year, and we just get used to it. It's unfortunate, but that's how our systems work. So again, I'm sorry I can't make it there. Maybe sometime the next time that I get invited, we'll do this in the middle of the year, maybe. And that way there's a little bit more guarantee about travel. So Maggie invited me to talk about not only the recent flooding that happened, but, other impactful weather events. And will these things happen again? Should we just say that this is a one-off and that's it? Or should we plan for the future? And what my presentation is really all about is just showing you how really focusing on the events that have happened multiple times and that we need to plan for. And I guess I didn't share this. My apologies. Hold on. There we go. Thumbs up from anybody if once they see it. Perfect. Thanks, Jen. All righty. So just a little outline of what we are. And I mean, it's a very small outline of National Weather Service Burlington. I'm going to look at the top weather disasters in Vermont that largely impacted this entire state, but Rutland since 1900. Whoops. Talk about the July flooding, how it compares to other flood events, and then some winter weather events, which last year, surprisingly, was a very active year, despite being the third warmest winter on record. So just the NWS mission and structure, whether the National Weather Service is around to provide climate, water, and weather forecasts and decision support services for the protection of life and property, to work closely with towns and decision makers to help them prepare for any hazardous weather. In the state of Vermont, the Burlington office has the responsibility of forecasts and warnings for all of the state except for Bennington and Windham. That is handled by the Albany office. The reason for the structure is some 30 years ago, the new radars were implemented, and the radar in Albany could see Bennington and Windham better than the radar could in Burlington. Since then, 30 years is a long time. Technology has changed. We can definitely see everything. I can follow hurricanes off of Puerto Rico and everything else, but the structure has stayed the same because the political climate and governments kind of don't like change. So changing Bennington and Windham to Burlington, some of the local folks and even the state were like, well, we have a good relationship with Albany. Why do we want all of a sudden move it to Burlington? And I totally understand that. Will that ever change in the future? I don't know, but certainly you've got me and you got the Burlington staff there being in Rutland, and that's not going away anytime soon. So on that big map, just so you kind of know for reference, all those red dots are the forecast offices across the country, 122 forecast offices across the country. The green shading represents the Eastern region offices, the offices that are managed by our folks over in New York. So looking at top weather events for Vermont since the 1900 prior to this year, I think we could all agree, maybe monetarily it wasn't the #1 event, but certainly in impacts was the November 27 flood with 84 fatalities, close to 1,300 bridges lost, hundreds of miles of roads and railroad tracks destroyed. Irene comes in at #2, no surprising there, with 5 fatalities. Again, bridges and hundreds of miles of roads destroyed, but not to the impact as in 1927. Long Island, New England hurricane in September of 1938. Not many people talk about that because it really wasn't much in the flooding aspect as it was, at least for Vermont. There was some flooding. It was the wind impacts. This was a hurricane that was a Category 3 hurricane as it reached Long Island. and dissipated to a Category 1 and maintained a Category 1 when it moved across the state of Vermont. And this storm was moving at a forward speed of 60 miles an hour, so at highway speed. So it was really quickly a hit and run type of event. And we're talking about 1938, so we didn't have satellite technology or half the technology to know that it was even coming. So in some places, you woke up that morning and it was fine and dandy, and by 2, 3 in the afternoon, it was all hell breaking loose. Another event that you'll hear about today a lot is the almost 50 years to the date of the July flooding was a similar flood event, June 20th and 30th in 1973. A winter storm that I had always seen in the record books about. It was like the top 5 for Burlington snowfall, but I never really digested and looked into it much until I was asked to do a presentation for a Vermont Preparedness Conference 4 years ago. And I dove into this storm a lot more. And that may be the biggest impactful winter storm we've ever had. And in fact, as you notice, I have it higher than the ice storm of 98. And you'll see the reason why here in a bit. So a review of the flooding event of this summer. First of all, we can't start without having the event that led it all 2 days prior, and that was the July 7th flash flooding over in Killington and Plymouth. Thunderstorms developed and moved across the state largely between noon and 8. When they developed across the high peaks of the Southern Greens, they pretty much remained stationary from 2:30 to 5:30 in the evening. And what that did is in the lower left here, these are radar estimates for rainfall. And if I blow that up over in the Killington area, you can see the rainfall estimates being in this lighter pink into almost this darker red, estimated 3 to 4 inches of rainfall. And sure enough, some of the ground truth reports was 4.5 inches in West Bridgewater. Depending on where you were in Killington, this is how fine of a footprint it was for the heavy rainfall. It would range from 2.66 inches in Killington to 4.43 in Killington. So quite a dump to see that much rainfall on any given time scale, let alone have it be in a 2.5 to 3 hour time frame. And that's where you can see the flash flooding that occurred in Plymouth and other locations there in your top right. So for this event, you're going to see this graphic again. So I'm not going to get too detailed into it, but it's more of this table down here that I want you to just try to remember. It was an unseasonably strong blocking pattern. It's a blocking pattern that we see typically in the cool season, October through April, when we're talking about big nor'easters or big winter storms. So that was the type of overall weather pattern we were in, but we were in July. So the graphic here in the top left kind of shows it's a negative tilt trough and a big high pressure area to our north kind of blocking things. The graphic in the lower left, similar. You can see that the H, or the orangeness of that, near that H, is a blocking pattern of a high that basically surrounds the area of low pressure. So there's your block. The system's not going to move east. On a surface map, we had that upper level low and surface low up in Canada, but then we had an area of a stalled frontal boundary that allowed little waves to move along that frontal boundary. And then in the lower right, this is what we look at for the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. So typically in a wintertime regime, the amount of moisture that the atmosphere holds, say in January, is equivalent to a sponge that has a 1/2 inch of water. So when you have this blocking pattern and you only have one sponge that has a 1/2 inch of water and you wring it out maybe 2-3 times, then you may be wringing out 1 to 1.5 inches of water. Now, if you have a snow to water equivalent of 15 inches for every 1 inch, you're talking about 20 inches of snowfall. The problem is when you get into the summer months, the atmosphere holds more water when it's warmer. And in this case, we had a wintertime pattern, but summertime temperatures. So the atmosphere was able to hold 4 sponges. So instead of the atmosphere only holding a 1/2 inch of water, it was holding 2 inches of water. And those sponges rang out 2, 3, or more times, and that's why you saw 4, 5, 6+ inches of rainfall. So the radar loop, just the main event was late Sunday through early Monday. You can see right here on that one page, and I will go to it again later. The heaviest rainfall fell across southern Vermont on Sunday afternoon and evening when it was more thunderstorms, where rainfall rates were easily in excess of 1 inch per hour in the early stages, but then it kind of drifted down when you didn't have the thunderstorms. The amount of the rainfall rates were a little bit less, to about 1/4 inch per hour. The flash flooding started late Sunday night, early Monday morning, starting in the south, moved on to the north, and then it translated into river flooding. So just the time shots at 4 p.m., you can see these little red and yellow areas, especially these red areas. These are thunderstorms, heavy rainfall rates of maybe 1 inch to 2 inches per hour, starting 4 o'clock in southern Vermont. By 8 o'clock, that is lifted to the north. More precipitation down in the New York City area is poised for Vermont. Sure enough, by midnight, that's already moving into southern Vermont with more activity down in Connecticut. By 4 a.m., that activity that was over southern Vermont has now moved into the rest of Vermont. That activity, along with a little weak area of low pressure, is still feeding stuff in by 4 a.m. on Monday. And at 8 o'clock on Monday, we have one more big swath of moderate rainfall that's moving up across the area. At this point, as we get into 8 a.m. Monday, we've already had flash flooding starting to begin across much of the region. During the day on Monday, here's that 8 a.m. picture. That rainfall lifts up. So by noontime, we're kind of in a light to moderate rainfall. But by 4 p.m., all that heavy rainfall, for the most part, has lifted to our north. And by 8 o'clock in the evening, all the rainfall has pretty much ended across the southern 4 counties of Vermont, but continues to rain not only 8 o'clock Monday evening, but it rained overnight across the northern third of the state. It rained up until about 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning. So the end result when it comes to the amount of rainfall that we witnessed, largely anything in that box, black box, is largely 4 to 6 inches, with the Champlain Valley and the Connecticut Valley seeing less, only 2 to 4. Which still is pretty hefty, to say the least. This resulted in catastrophic flooding, especially a localized flash flooding that happened during the event. Just a snapshot of some pictures of what it looked like. I gave a presentation at the Vermont Preparedness Conference last week, and I mentioned it when you're looking at the photograph here in the top right and lower right is the Swiftwater Vermont Task Force 1. These folks were the true heroes of this event. They had over 200, between whether it was evacuations or rescues, 200 sorties during a 4 or 5 week period across the state of Vermont. Quite a hero's amount of work that these folks did. Okay, I know you're going to be like, why am I showing the Winooski River Basin? I'm going to show you 2 basins about what the main stem rivers looked like. The Winooski, largely, I'm going to show you this first because of Montpelier and the impacts in Montpelier, and then I will get into what happened in the Otter Creek. So my little key here in my the lower right hand side, you're going to see these historic crests color coded. The red is for the July of 23 flooding. The bold and black is what we saw for hydrographs or river levels with Irene. The blue, I already mentioned about the June 1973 flooding. So that's going to be a reference to that. And then the orange is in a reference to the 1938 hurricane. So if we start with the left hydrograph, that is the Winooski River at Montpelier. The red again mentions what the levels were reached at for the July event. And you can see it was the second highest crest at the gauge in Montpelier, only second to the 1927 flood, and actually surpassed by more than 2 feet of the level that was witnessed by Irene. Now, the graph in the top right is the Winooski River at Waterbury. The significance about the Winooski, the gauge at Waterbury, is that is where the State Emergency Operations Center is. And as you know from Irene, the state office building complex sits in the floodplain. Not really where you want to have your state EOC, but That's for another discussion. So anyways, and this gauge, by the way, was only installed maybe about a year before Irene. So that's why you don't have the historical crests that go back beyond 2011. But you can see with Irene, it crested at about 430 feet. With this event here in July, it crested 4 feet below that, which was still pretty significant because it did force the state EOC to evacuate, as well as evacuations in downtown Waterbury. And then the gauge in the middle is the gauge that is downstream from these folks. This is where the dam is on Route 2, or 2A rather, on 2A in Wilson Essex Junction. And you can see historically, for this event, number 3 was, we were number 3. Irene was number 4. The 38 Hurricane was number 7. And then the July 1973, an event again that I will be talking about again, was number 10. You look at number 1 being Irene and you're like 27 feet higher. The data for 1927 is not necessarily measured. It is estimated by surveys. I can't tell you what the cause of that might have been. It might have been because there was no dam at that point in 1927. So I can't really give you, I can't give you an answer to that. But if you look at some of these other dates, like number 2, it happened in March. Number 5, number 6 happened in February and March. Those are crests, but it's not due to the amount of water in the river in terms of flowing water. It's due to ice jams. So that's why you had ice jams at the gauge, and that's why you had the river levels so high on those dates. So this shows you in perspective for the Winooski Basin. And then here in Rutland, the historical crest is Irene at 17.2 feet. And then this July event, we were just a foot below. And then the 38 Hurricane, we were 3 feet below. And you can see one of the other dates is the 73 storm, which I refer to. So it was still a very significant event in the greater Rutland area as well. So comparing this July with other flooding, it's comparing a little of apples and apples and apples and oranges. And I'll show you here in a second. So the apple and oranges is we're comparing just an area of low pressure. This is the July event versus an actual tropical system, which was Irene in 2011. With this recent event, we had widespread 2 to 5 inches of rainfall, some locally 7, in a 24 to 30 hour time frame. With Irene, we had the state see 4 to 6 inches widespread, locally 8 inches in half the time frame. Thus, you had the greater flash flooding. Now, comparing apples with apples, here is on again the left July of 23, and then a similar event, an area of low pressure moving up during the summertime and wintertime pattern. And you can see widespread 2 to 4, but areas of 4 to 6 inches of rain across the state. I showed you this map synoptically or meteorologically of what was going on this July. Here is what it looked like in 1973. Here's your negative tilt upper low, your blocking high, a stalled frontal boundary, areas of low pressure moving along the stalled frontal boundary, and deep tropical moisture feeding into the system. So basically, what we had in 73 and what we had with 2023 were basically identical in terms of the origins. And we've seen these situations happen other times as well. And just to go for the rest of July, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I took a lot of these slides out. I saved this slide, and this was because of all the other flooding that we had or the heavy rainfall events we had through the most of July or whatever. There was really only one other in the greater Rutland area and Middlebury that was really significant, and that was August 3rd and August 4th. You can see from the flash flooding and the swift water rescue here in Middlebury on August 3rd. I was actually traveling from Rutland. I had just had a ceremony with Rutland Regional Medical Center on a storm ready ceremony for them. And I was driving back and just missed this heavy footprint on the 3rd. And then, of course, the rainfall that just dumped in the greater Rutland area that lasted maybe 2 hours and quickly dumped 3 to 4 inches of rainfall and led for urban flooding in downtown Montpelier. I mean, in downtown Rutland. Okay, winter storms. We have a lot of these, and they're kind of repetitious. I will just talk about the 3 main ones that have impacts. There's the nor'easter, which is generally large amounts of snow, can be breezy conditions. The impacts vary greatly. A powdery dry snow is more of a visibility impact or a drifting of the snow. Meanwhile, wet, heavy snows lead to potential power outages. Freezing rain and ice storms. Freezing rain is anytime you have a glaze of ice. We refer to ice storms that are when the ice accumulation, radial ice accumulation, so it's around a wire or something, is greater than 1/4 of an inch, but especially when the radial, when that measurement is greater than 1/2 inch. And then also the localized damaging wind events that the western slopes of the greens there in Rutland County are famous for. So the complexity of a nor'easter, I won't get into the meteorology into the left here, but off to the right, it really comes down to where is the low tracking. The red arrow represents that if the area of low pressure tracks basically across southeastern Massachusetts, the Boston area, likely the greatest impact for all Vermont, especially in Rutland County, is going to be widespread and the greatest impact. If the storm travels just to the southeast of Cape Cod, then maybe medium impacts. There may be several inches or dusting in northern Vermont, but it's the southern four counties that will see the greatest impact. And then if that area of low pressure tracks along or south of a benchmark, which we call the 40° north, 70° west benchmark, then really there's not much of any impact. There's probably no snow at all, and it's probably maybe even sunny skies in along the Canadian border, but you'll have a flurries or maybe a few inches in southern Vermont. One big storm, we classify these in different types of storms, but one big storm was the Pi Day storm, the March 14-15 storm in 2017. You can see at 5 p.m. on the 13th, there was a small area of low pressure around the Appalachians and a small area of low pressure trying to develop off the southeast United States. Basically, the energy from this storm in the Appalachians was transferring over the coast. Some 12 hours later, the pressure went from 1,012 to 992 millibars. That was 8 o'clock on the 4th. And by 8 p.m. on the 14th, it was 980. You might have heard the terminology called bombogenesis. The CNN or others will maybe say there's a bomb that has exploded off the eastern seaboard or whatever. Basically, all that means is if an area of low pressure has strengthened, meaning that the pressure has lowered 24 millibars in a 24-hour period or less, then that's what they call explosive cyclogenesis, and people are calling it now bombogenesis. So just a little background on that. There are 2 loops going on here. It's going to be kind of hard to follow. Let me first start with the, this is the Pi Day storm. Let me first start with the one on the left. This highly shaded area, these yellows and browns that are coming off the Connecticut coast, that's what we call bright banding, where it's rain and snow melting and it gives a higher reflectivity. But by the time that activity reaches northern Connecticut, central Mass, and then eventually southern Vermont, that is all snow. So you can see that at noontime, there was an intense band of snowfall, 3 inches an hour or greater, that was entering the Vermont-Mass border. If you look at the similar loop on the right-hand side, that band that started at the Vermont-Mass border at noon lifted up and started to slow down. So across central Vermont, it was between 2 and 3:30. In northwestern Vermont, we had a 3-hour period of an intense band. And then as it rotated into northeastern New York, that band sat there for some 7 hours before rotating back into northwestern Vermont and brought some incredible snowfall totals. In fact, this is an hourly graph when that storm or that band moved over the airport in Burlington. And in a 3-hour period, we had almost 11 inches of snow. Then it slowed down for a couple hours. And then during the early morning hours, that band rotated back into the Burlington area, and we saw 6-7 inches of snow in a 5-hour period. It is to this date the second highest snowfall for Burlington, and you can see the map here. When that band rotated into northwest Vermont, northeastern New York, and just sat there, a lot of places got over 30 inches, and there was also a report of 42 inches of snow. You can see the snowfall amounts down in southern Vermont were quicker because that band moved through, that the band never really lasted more than an hour, hour and a half in one given location. So with these explosive storms, we can get these very intense snow bands, and that can deposit very easily 2-3 inches of snow per hour. And if you talk to anybody at Public Works, or especially at Vermont ALT, Vermont ALT's routes on the highway generally last up to 2 hours, maybe longer, for them to complete a full route. So if you get 3 inches of snow, say on Interstate 89 or Route 7 or Route 9 or 91, you could very well, and by the time that they finish their one rotation, their one path, and start again, you could see 4 to 6 inches of fresh snow on the highway. So these type of events are the ones that are problematic. The other ones, as we saw 2 of these events last winter, is the early season or late season wet snowfalls. These are the storms where temperatures are marginal at the in the valleys, and they're even marginal at the higher elevations. So what generally will happen is that may start off as rain. So you get your wires, your tree branches that are coated in just wetness. Then it gets cold enough, you get those big, wet, heavy snowflakes that adhere to a wet wire or a wet branch, kind of like paste. And then the more accumulation you get, the greater impacts you have. So we worked with the utilities and looking at past storms. And we have this reference table here in the lower right that actually looks at the weight of the snow based on the snow to water ratio I mentioned earlier. And when we look at the map here in the upper right, you can see the dark red here represents, or the lighter red represents 18 inches or more of snowfall. That if you go to the table here, any place that's expected to have greater than 15 inches of snowfall is expected to have down tree limbs, some trees snapped, with widespread power outages. And sure enough, here's the graphic. And you can see there was more than 50,000 outages with the December 15th, 17th wet snow event, and another 40,000 plus outages with the early spring, March 14th, March 15th snow event. As you can see from the pictures in the lower left and the upper right, how that snow just cakes up on the trees and everything, and the weight of it forces it down. So those are the storms. And these used to be, these heavy wet snows, besides being an early and a late season, the frequency wasn't as great as they were in southern New England, where you're closer to the water and it's generally milder. Climate change has changed that, and we are going to see multiple events like this probably every year, where we are having more wet, heavy snowfall events. Thus, you're going to have more power issues to deal with. And again, just to show you, this is what we do for our impacts. We take what we're expecting of the impacts and we compare it with our snowfall accumulation. And this is distributed to emergency managers, the state of Vermont, and utility companies, so they know what to expect for potential conditions. The ice storm, largely this impacted more of the Champlain Valley than it did the rest of the state. There were higher elevations and higher degrees of impacts with the ice storm of 1998, but it was largely a Champlain Valley, a Canada, and a St. Lawrence Valley of New York type of storm. Largely what you were getting is we're in a stalled pattern here in your upper right-hand corner. This is the upper level wind flow, so you're bringing in mild, moist air at the higher levels of the atmosphere, because warm air is less dense, so it's buoyant, so it lifts. Meanwhile, the area of high pressure here with a a clockwise rotation, dense air is heavier, so it wants to undercut the cold air, the warm air, and thus bringing you the ice and stuff. On the weather map, you just basically, here's the January 7th and January 9th. You had big areas of high pressure with very cold temperatures up here in northern Quebec, teens below zero. But then just off the coast, you had temperatures in the 50s and 60s, and we were in the battleground. So what I mentioned, so if you look at a meteorological sounding, this yellow line, this dashed yellow line is freezing. Anything to the left of it is below freezing. Anything to the right of it is above freezing. So you can see at the upper levels of the atmosphere, it's falling as a snowflake. Then all of a sudden at around 8,000 to 10,000 feet, the temperature warms above freezing. So that snowflake turns into a raindrop. And in fact, here at 5,000 feet, the temperature is 50 degrees Fahrenheit. But then you can see from these wind barbs here, the winds all of a sudden come to the northeast in the last 1,000 feet, and the temperature goes from 50 degrees to basically 22 degrees. And this allows for the raindrops to refreeze, but because the depth of that cold air is very shallow, it still falls as a wet raindrop, but it's the surface temperatures, it's your power lines, it's your cars, it's your sidewalks and roads that were in the teens and 20s, and thus allowed for the ice to build up. And this is some of the scenes that you saw here in the left, and to the right shows you the widespread ice accumulation. You can see it was largely a Champlain Valley, but there was some other aspects in the mountainous terrain. Can that happen again? Statewide, we had something that was much bigger. That was the December 1969 storm. Big area high pressure on Christmas Day of 1969. We were sub-zero. A lot of the places in Vermont were 10 to 25 degrees below zero on the 25th. That area high pressure just nudges a little bit further to the north. Area low pressure from the Gulf moves to the south into the mid-Atlantic states, starts dumping snow. We had 1 to 2 feet of snow on December 26th. On December 27th, that area of low pressure has moved now, and it's sitting in the Gulf of Maine, basically off of the Massachusetts coastline. Because of the counterclockwise circulation, it is bringing in milder air off of the water, and it's bringing it into an area, so it's melting the snow, but the ground temperatures are still cold enough. So on the 27th, we already had 1 to 2 feet of snow on the 26th. On the 27th, a lot of areas saw 6 to 15 plus inches of snow. But because of the warmer air aloft trying to get into eastern Vermont, we started to see significant icing. And then the next day on the 28th, it was warm enough upstairs for the snow change to rain, but the temperatures at ground level were still below 32 degrees. So it allowed for significant ice everywhere. So so this kind of diagram kind of shows it. The warmer air was coming in at the mid parts of the storm, and the cold air was staying at the ground. So the end result was a large part of the state saw 2+ feet of snow. Some places saw localized more than 40 inches of snow. And then the ice on top of it, statewide, was largely 1 to 2. Some places saw localized 3 inches. So you can imagine having 2 to 3 feet of snow on a roof or anywhere, and then you add 1 to 2 inches of ice on top of that. There was numerous buildings, as you see the descriptions here. There were numerous structural collapses, vehicle damage, trees down, utility lines, power being lost for several days to a week or more. And there were 6 fatalities from people due to carbon monoxide poisoning on the roads because they could not get out of their vehicles, and their exhaust pipes of their vehicles got clogged up. And we do the same messaging with the ice impacts as well. And then lastly, I just want to go over the downsloping or the damaging winds that we see every year. The meteorological setup is if you have a storm that's in Pennsylvania or is moving across the eastern Great Lakes, and that storm intensifies as it's moving across the St. Lawrence Valley. We have a southeasterly flow that's moving over to the mountains, but we have this inversion over the mountains as well. So the flow wants to go, the normal flow would be as if you take the flow over the mountain and it bumps into something higher, the tendency is that it's going to want to go up in the atmosphere. But when you have this inversion, it's like a cap of this water jug, which I don't know if you can see me or not, or pretend this is actually like a candle. When you're lighting a candle, you have those thermals and the smoke and the flames that wants to go up because there's no obstruction. But if you have an inversion, or in this case, for a mountain and the winds want to go up, you put that cap, you suffocate the winds from going up, and instead of going up, then the winds want to go down on the leeward side of the mountains. So that means that these winds at 5,000, 4,000, 5,000 feet at 60, 70, 80 miles an hour have no place to go but onto the other side of the mountains. So that's what happened last December. You know, the date that we had that flash freeze where we went from 50 degrees to in the teens by the evening, and everything that went wet and refroze. You can see we had an area of low pressure area in the Great Lakes. It strengthened very quickly into the western part of New York, and then maintained that strength and actually continued to strengthen in Quebec and Ontario provinces. The wind speeds at 3,000 to 5,000 feet were 80 to 100 knots. So if you translate that to miles per hour, we're looking at 100 to 115 miles an hour. This middle graphic here shows what the wind speeds were at the top of Mount Mansfield. You can see that actually the measured winds were in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and measured wind gusts got as high as 130 miles an hour at the top of Mount Mansfield. When it came and translated and moved over the mountain, you see the winds were largely in the 50s, 40s, or whatever. These, I believe, are undercutting what actually happened, because there was a crest, there was a 15, 20-minute window where we went from 40-mile-an-hour winds to 70-mile-an-hour winds. And I think when that came, it knocked out the power, and a lot of these sensors did not have any power. This 71 miles an hour was at the airport in Burlington. That is our second largest wind ever at the airport. And seeing the damage that happened, especially in Chittenden and Franklin County and some into Addison County, wind estimates just based on that easily had to exceed 70 miles an hour. And you can see the Vermont outages map here in the upper right. It was largely, you can see a little bit in eastern Vermont, but you can see most of it was along the western slopes of the greens. And again, more than 70,000 outages at peak. And we have, again, a reference to when we pass out information to our emergency managers, we have an impact scale of how many miles an hour and what you should expect for potential power outages or impacts based on that miles per hour, that wind speed. So I'm going to end it here, but just to let you know that there is a Storm Ready program. What the Storm Ready program is, it's basically asking folks to look at their emergency action plans. And if you do not have a weather annex in that plan or an actual weather incident plan, to consider doing it. So when you have that next big event, you're not starting from scratch. You've already got your plans on what needs to be done based on the forecast. I told you about me being down in Rutland. Abigail Spielman, who is the emergency manager for Rutland Regional Medical Center, came up with this beautiful severe weather plan. And this is just one of 8 or 12 pages of it. And it's really comprehensive. And I think it can be adapted to every community. And she just did a great job with that. And because of her efforts, Rutland Regional Medical Center was recognized as a Storm Ready supporter. So I will end it right there. And I'll open up to any questions, and I apologize for going a little bit longer than I expected. So anyone have any questions?
Hey, Scott, with the, down here in Rutland, we had an impact from the 47 flood. Where's that rank as far as, I know it's more localized in our area, but where's that rank as far as the other storms?
Because of the localized, it's not ranked in that ranking that I gave you at the beginning. And when it comes to the gauge at Rutland, it didn't even show up. Let me double check. Maybe it did show up. I didn't know about the 40 something. Let me see. Where was that?
And we lost the East Pittsford Dam and the Sagamont Dam just up the street from Jan, basically. So there's a lot of damage in the Rutland area.
Yeah. Yeah, it never even, in terms of the top 5 for the Rutland gauge, it didn't reach there. So the flow was probably more of a flash flood, eventually making it to the Otter Creek, but the outflow from it might not have reached the Otter Creek until it was downstream from this gauge, or because I only have the top 5 here, maybe if I go back to historical crest, maybe it's somewhere in the top 10 or something, but I don't have that right now.
Yeah, thank you.
Scott, this is Jan. I'm wondering if it would be helpful for folks if you explained why there were so many Vermont alert weather system updates that occurred mostly on computers, landlines, and cell phones during the July flood events. I know several of us have talked about it, but we understand the rationale of the different ones that were coming, but I'm not sure everyone understands why the Weather Service sends out some, Vermont Alerts might send out some, and what the difference is.
Thanks, Jan. Yeah. So we will send out alerts just through our mass communication levels, and depending on what weather subscription you subscribe to, you'll get alerts. I think the main alerts, VT Alert subscribes to our service, and when you sign up to VT Alert, you can choose which alerts you want to be notified on and which alerts you don't want to be notified on. So I think that has something to do with it. When it comes to wireless emergency alerts from cell phones, there's been agreement with the FCC, FEMA, and the National Weather Service that flash flood warnings are an alert that will automatically go through the wireless emergency alerts in the cell phone, because they feel that flash flooding is so quick natured in response from the heavy rainfall, and that the greatest number of deaths of any weather related stuff is flooding, with more than 80% of it being automobile related by people crossing flooded roads or whatever, that the FCC, FEMA, and the Weather Service had put that on their list for the alerts. So it's only the warnings that get alerted, the watches do not. So the process is, generally there would be a watch before you go with a warning in most cases.
I think I can comment that it was probably the most aware I've ever been in one of the events, just because of the nature of all the messages that were coming through.
Yeah, and also, Jan, the thing is too is we were issuing flash flood warnings for the most part are small warnings compared to like a river flood warning, which is the whole stream of the river. And when the radar operators were looking at what area is impacting, what area is not, you could have 5 different, we don't want to like just put a flash flood warning for the whole state when it doesn't matter. So we try to look at where is the heaviest rainfall, where are we seeing what is the most susceptible based on terrain and ground truth reports, and we'll issue them. So generally most of those warnings will go 3 to 6 hours, but in a case like this event where the event was a 24-30 hour event, there was a lot of extending the original warning in time and in space. And in one situation, especially down in the Ludlow area, and I think it had parts of Rutland County as well, is we went from a flash flood warning to a flash flood emergency.
Mm-hmm.
Which not many people are aware of that even exists. And certainly up here, that is a rarity, and the first time we ever issued a flash flood emergency. And the flash flood emergency is basically that the flash flooding that is going on is so severe, and we have ground truth reports of swiftwater rescues and other things being on, that we want to make sure people are aware that this is a life or death situation. Not that all flash flooding is not anyways, but it is being verified and witnessed, and there are ongoing swiftwater rescues, and people should be aware of that severity. We don't take that warning lightly. All the rainfall events we had for the month of July, we only issued it that one time, and even for that day, the 9th to the 11th, where the state was inundated with flash flood warnings, we only issued it for that one location.
Thank you.
Yep. Anyone else? All right, then I thank you very much, folks. I greatly appreciate the time and the opportunity. Again, I wish I could have been there in person. This time of the year and after 30 years being in the government, nothing surprises me anymore. And I'm sure with you folks, your responsibility and have to go for grants or you need to work with outside of your town you may feel good about, but then you get to the state level, or if you go to the federal level, you start seeing the bureaucracy rearing its ugly head. So I think you certainly understand where I'm coming from. So thank you again. Any last minute questions before I go and let you guys finish?
Yeah, I think we're all set. Thank you so much for taking the time to present today, Scott. Very, very informative. And if you'd like to stay, you can. If not, please feel free to have the rest of your evening.
Okay.
And thank you again.
All right. Thank you very much, folks. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah.
Well, Maggie, you got anything else before we move along?
I guess the only comment I want to make is I will reach out to Abby Spiegelman and get that plan of hers that she so lovingly crafted. There might be potential for a workshop maybe sometime next year where we can have some of our towns potentially complete a similar plan. So maybe just kind of keep that tucked in the back of your mind for now as a potential event we could do within the next year, which I think, given his point about climate change making these events more frequent, more severe, more prolonged, probably wouldn't be a bad idea.
I agree. So we are shooting for we're a little behind schedule, but I think we're going to get caught up here in a second. REMC representative reports. First off, statewide local emergency planning commission representatives Bob Morlino.
Yeah, so Bob isn't here tonight. I haven't seen him pop in anyway. And he usually is pretty good about messaging me if there's any updates before an REMC meeting, and I've received no such email, so I am going to assume all is quiet on the home front.
All right. I do not have any updates from THERA SPR. And so next up, we have the Integrated Planning and Preparedness Workshop, or also known as IPPW, and the representative is Tom Johnston. Tom, you're muted. Tom, you're muted.
Okay. Is that much better now, Michael?
Better.
Thank you. I do not have any updates to present here tonight.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Maggie, anything else before we move on?
I think that's the first time, at least since I've been here, that we've had no representative reports across the board. We do just kind of leave them on the agenda as a default for the good of the order, and because these events take place at different times throughout the year. But thank you for humoring us with that. So
Yeah.
do that. So.
I think it's good practice. So we're actually moving into the REMC organizational tasks. Vote and the first task is the voting membership appointments.
Oh, yes. This was more of a reminder than an actual task for us to do, but I just wanted to remind everyone, as we mentioned, fiscal year is about to come to an end on September 30th. The new one will start on October 1st. And sometime during the month of October, I will be sending out memos, thanking everyone for their service and asking if there's any interest in being reappointed as a voting member. This will also include the form you may recall I sent out last year, where you wrote down the emergency management representative and the emergency services representative, appointed your proxies, got it signed off by the select board, and returned it to me. So that process will be starting soon. No hard deadline yet, but it would be nice to get everyone reappointed before our next meeting. So just keep that tucked in the back of your mind that this will probably be something coming up in your inbox in the next couple of weeks.
Okay. And then next up we have, I believe this is a vote because Maggie, correct me if I'm wrong, we had a discussion about this at the last meeting, the changing quorum requirements.
Yes, actually, both of the items we're looking at tonight are going to be votes. So just as a quick review, because it's been a couple of months, there was a bill that passed the Vermont legislature that sets a quorum for an REMC at 5 voting members. And the primary reason behind this being passed was to allow REMCs to actually make quorum, because most of them never could. With the definition of it being the majority of members, and allowing them to change quorum to something more realistic, more pragmatic. So in our discussion at our last meeting, we agreed that it would be, the expectation was that the quorum would be at least 20% of the voting membership. So with our numbers, 2 representatives from each municipality, there's 27 municipalities, that's 54 total. Dividing that by 5 gives you 10.8, so round it up to at least 11 voting members. And we all agreed that 11 would be a good number to set as a quorum. On this last bullet, the new language, it was not something I had on the slide last time, but I don't think it's going to be very controversial, because it's essentially replacing key phrases. So the original language was quorum is defined as majority of voting members, including proxies being present. That translates to 28 members out of the 54 voting members, 2 from each municipality. With our new number of 11, I've tweaked the definition, so quorum can also be defined as the minimum number of voting members that need to be present in order to conduct official business. Now, in most cases, this means a majority, but there are exceptions where state legislatures or other official bodies can set the number themselves. So this language reflects that. Given a legally mandated minimum of 20% of the voting body, this translates to 11 members out of 54 voting members, 2 from each municipality. So this vote is essentially deciding whether we will include this language and replace the old language with the new quorum requirement.
Cool. So if anybody was around when we first started, then you're as excited as I am to make this motion and see the change. So with that, I will seek a motion to change the quorum requirements as Maggie explained.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
All right, we've got a motion, we got a second. If there's no discussion, then all in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? All right, no opposed. The motion passes unanimously. And then
Excellent.
Maggie, move on the next vote.
I'll make the motion.
But we need to pass it, Jen.
What's that?
I want to at least remind people what the next thing we're voting on is.
Oh, okay.
I appreciate the enthusiasm, but so the other language we're looking to change in the bylaws, or rather language to add because it doesn't currently exist, is language specifying voter membership turnover procedures. There's been a lot of changing of the guard this past fiscal year with people moving, people resigning, transferring over posts. And every time I had to be like, oh yeah, I need to, actually keep up with who the voting members are in the REMC and have them like appointed as proxies again and go through this whole process. And it's not something that was written on paper. It was just something that I realized had to be done. So I think just for clarity and to make people who take over my position in the future have a bit of an easier life, just kind of putting it down on paper would be a good thing to do. So I introduced the language you see in the quotes here at the last meeting, which we agreed upon. In the event of emergency management representative and or emergency services representative turnover, the new candidates shall receive a signed reappointment form from the select board and deliver it to the RRPC within 60 days. So that hopefully, between meetings, we'll have the new names ready to go. So, yeah, that's what we're voting on. So go ahead, Mike.
All right, do we have a motion to add language specifying voting membership turnover procedures?
I'll try again. So moved.
Second. All right, if we have no discussion on it, and then all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion passes unanimously. And then next up, we have open public comment. Is there any public here?
Just before that, I want to add really quick, now that we've voted in these amendments to the bylaws, what will happen is between now and the next meeting, I will amend the bylaws as we've agreed, and then I'll have Mike sign the pages. That's what David Atherton did when the bylaws were first drafted. And considering the significance of these changes, I just think it would be a good thing to have a fresh signature on there. So that'll be done between now and the next meeting.
Awesome. All right, any comments from the public? All right, before we adjourn and before I hand over the meeting over to Maggie to let us know when the next meeting is, I just want to say that I think Maggie's been doing an incredible job. She meets with me and Jan before meetings just to get the agenda squared away. She handled the amendments, and she had really, really big shoes to fill when she took over the emergency management. So just a big, you don't have to actually do it, but big round of applause for Maggie and everything she's been doing for the committee and the region. So that's for you, Maggie. And do you have any other comments for us? Any important notes?
Just that it's been a pleasure. I feel like I'm actually coming up on my work anniversary next week. October 3rd marks 1 year since I started at the RRPC.
It scared you away yet.
And I feel like I've learned so much within the past year. This is actually my first quote unquote professional job out of college. And I was really fortunate to end up with this family, not only in the RRTC, but with all of these towns too. I can't really imagine my life without you guys now. So thank you for being a pleasure to work with. And hopefully, the next few years we can keep going forward and making ourselves bigger and better.
For sure. We're really proud of you and appreciate you. So with all that, do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion passes. Thanks, everybody. Nice evening.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Next meeting, Wednesday, December 13th, 2023, same time, same place.
See you then.
Great.